The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
This bill is about giving our cabinet directors and our departments and our local governments the flexibility they need to manage their workforce to the mission to serve the taxpayers.
Our primary concern dealing with the firefighters and police officers is safety would no longer be a mandatory subject of bargaining. Most of our contract deals with safety.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. Elections have consequences. The sweeping Democratic victory in 2008 set up the passage of the national health care law. Republican victories last November in certain states, including Ohio, means that their agenda is moving forward. One of the first places this new initiative can be seen is on the concerted efforts in states where Republicans control the legislature and the governor's offices, such as Ohio and Wisconsin, to limit the power and influence of public sector unions. In Ohio, that has taken the form of Senate Bill 5 that was introduced 2 weeks ago by Senator Shannon Jones of Springboro. Last week, Senator Jones was a guest on Newsmakers to explain the key elements of the bill. This past week, union members converged on Columbus to express their opposition. Parallel but even larger actions are taking place in Wisconsin. To discuss the proposed Senate Bill 5 from the perspective of organized labor, I am joined this week by Julie Sellers, the president of the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, and Peter McLinden, the regional director of the Ohio Council 8 of AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Both of you, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you.
Pete, you've been up in Columbus twice this week already for some of the hearings. I was talking to Senator Jones last week. Has there been any substantial change in the proposal that has taken place in that week that changes the basic dynamics of this proposal?
No, pretty much the proposal is the same as Senator Jones has introduced. And again, this is the same type of anti-employee legislation that we've seen from Governor Kasich. We have to remember the budget situation in Ohio just didn't arise overnight. This is after 16 years of Republican rule under Voinovich and Taft, where we saw deregulation, we saw the cutting of taxes on the rich and the business, and then the Wall Street and the dot-com bubble, the housing bubble, the Great Recession, a lot of these things. Many Republicans on the far right believe that if you keep passing the tax burden onto the middle class and taking away from the business interests, that this somehow will create jobs. And it won't create jobs. This bill will destroy jobs. It will hurt the middle class, and we believe it's going to hurt a lot of small business owners also.
Okay, Julie, Pete has just sort of put it in this larger context. But from the perspective of people who aren't in the public sector, are not government employees, not member of a public sector union, work in the rest of the economy where unions are much smaller, less than 7% unionized, and people don't have the sort of built-in wage ladders, the guaranteed retirements, the same health benefits. Do you have some sense of why people are reacting very strongly, even given all of what Pete just said? Lots of people out there in the society have some very strong feelings about what public sector employees do have.
Well, I think some of it is a misperception to the general public about what we have. We do have collective bargaining, and many times through negotiations, we look at the budget, we look at what's happening with the economy. Teachers haven't had a raise for 4 or 5 years. Their salaries have been flat. Teachers, in our last round of negotiations, we did not get any type of cost of living raise. We have not, but yet our health care more than doubled. We are paying the 20% of the premium.
And that's one thing. In this bill, it says that all public sector employees will pay at least 20%. Teachers do pay 20%?
Teachers do pay 20%. Okay. And we went from 9% to 20%. Okay. We understood that, that our negotiations were ratified, our contract was ratified 2-to-1. Teachers understand that. They know that the budget for the district is what has to be balanced for us to do that. And we try to work with the district to do it effectively.
You said, though, that there's no salary increases. That's been flat. But in your world, there are step raises for longevity, not just based on performance. And that's not what the rest of the economy experiences. And many people have been absolutely flat in the last 3 or 4 years. So I think that's part of the confusion too. You say there's no raises, but people looking at it from the outside say, well, wait a minute, a person does get step raises.
We do get step raises at certain years. They are based on the evaluation. If you are a teacher who is not effective, your salary step stays frozen until you either go through the intervention process. We know that teachers who are experienced are stronger teachers. We want the most effective teachers in every classroom. It takes 3, 4, 5 years before a teacher really becomes fully effective in a classroom, just because they do need that experience of developing lessons, what works, what doesn't work. So ours is just based on experience, and that is a little bit different than what the public also believes, because they know that to have a good teaching force, you have to have experienced teachers.
Pete, in this proposed bill, Senate Bill 5, the only things that would be mandatory for a government agency, whether it's the school system or the city or whatever it is, the only thing that they would have to negotiate about is wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment. How is that a change over what now exists?
That's a huge and fundamental change, which we believe is going to affect the public service that our workers provide. I mean, public workers, just like private sector workers, they want good jobs in this state. They want a good economy. They want to pay their fair share of taxes. Now, when you look at the collective bargaining law, Ohio Revised Code 4117, the system works. As Julia said with the negotiations, as our negotiations with the city of Cincinnati and across the state, workers have taken many, many concessions through the collective bargaining being at the table. What this law would do is basically take us away from the table and move all rights to management with no voice from the employees.
You know, you say that there's been lots of concessions, but we just went through the budget process in December with the city. Now, you represent AFSCME. You can't speak for all other unions, and I'm not asking you to. But, you know, there was sort of fighting every cut. So, you know, no police to be fired, no firefighters to be let go. At the same time, again, in private industry over the last 3 or 4 years, there have been huge cuts in every workforce that I know of. So it seems like a disconnect. So you say that you've been cooperative. Same thing on retirement, where the headlines in the papers are constantly about underfunded retirement plans in the public sector. So, you know, isn't there even more of concessions that have to be looked at, and people don't necessarily see it that you've been that cooperative?
Well, I think you have to look at the efficiencies that the public workers have provided to the public. I mean, for example, in Public Works with the city of Cincinnati, they are down 700 employees from just 2002. So there are a lot of efficiencies that can be held, negotiated between the cities, the townships, the state government with the employees. But if we're not at the table, we don't have that opportunity to get those kind of efficiencies, to make things better, and to still provide the quality services that the public depends on. I mean, this economic tsunami that is coming out of Columbus right now. If you eliminate the local government monies, if you eliminate the estate tax, that is going to create such a fundamental economic problems for local governments with no assistance from the state. I mean, it's a downward spiral that is going to keep pushing the tax burden onto the taxpayers, higher residents, and that's just unfair.
You know, another aspect of this is just the flow of negotiations, the ending of binding arbitration at the end. I'd like to play a little clip of what Shannon Jones, when I asked her about that, what she said about the way that this bill would change the setup of and change the flow of negotiations. Let's listen to that, and then we'll have you comment.
we're shining some light on the process with transparency. So what now is going to happen is we're going to say, from the time you start your negotiations, you've got 90 days to come under contract, and you can continue to operate as you always have in executive session and so forth to operate in good faith. But at that 90-day point, if you're not in a contract, now you have to show the public what your offers are, what their last best offer. Both sides are on the, have to show that.
Julie, let's begin with you. Your contract negotiations just went almost a year for all practical purposes. What's your reaction to this kind of proposal?
I think it's very unrealistic. I don't think that she understands collective bargaining. We were in interest-based bargaining. We spent hours upon hours trying to come up with problem-solving strategies to help the district, and you can't do that overnight. It isn't where we go in the room and we say this is our last best offer and then walk away and say, tell us what yours is. We did not do that until the very last, when there were just a few little things left on the table, and healthcare was one of those. But throughout that year, we looked at structures, we looked at class size, there were everything in the district. How is it operating?
But she would argue that a lot of that should be taken off the table, that it wouldn't even be negotiable in...
And I don't think that would be effective. It would not be what's best for children. It would not be best for classrooms. One of the things they want to take away is the ability to negotiate class size. Well, that's always been something that has been negotiated since the beginning of unions with teachers and school districts. To take that away, we could end up with class sizes of 40 students. That's not what's best for students. It's not what's best for teachers. I do think that the public would be against that, and I think that that's something that should still continue to be negotiated. We also negotiate things like instructional supplies to make sure that every teacher is given instructional supplies, which is still just a small percentage of that.
Let me ask some questions about where we're going from here. Okay, and Pete, you've been up in Columbus, and I know, Julie, you've been out of town. Thank you very much for being here this morning. I know you had to really juggle your schedule. Are there elements here of compromise? Are there things in this proposal that you could sit down with Shannon Jones and say, we can take that, but we really can't live with that? Do you see that's the way we're going? Do you see, massive action similar to what we're seeing in Wisconsin? We're taping on Friday mornings, and I was watching the news yesterday. Or do you see that maybe unions can come in and say, we'll make much larger concessions on retirement, on health care, in exchange for just don't mess with the negotiation process, eliminating, where do we go from here? And do you guys have any influence really at this point?
Well, again, we're always willing to come to the table, the public sector unions, with the other community support we've had, to negotiate these kind of changes. But it has to be at the table, and it has to be a level playing field. I know Shannon Jones talks about the prosperity of Ohio. What prosperity she's talking about is the rich and the well-to-do business class. This bill eliminates, it doesn't say come talk to us about concessions, eliminates the collective bargaining rights of 40,000 university, college, and state employees across the state. It didn't say come to the table. This is a backlash based on politics of what happened in November. This is not mandated by the people. Most people are against this. But we are, like I said, Dan, we're always willing to come to the table and talk.
Realistically, what do you think is going to happen? They control both houses and the governor's mansion. So what do you think is going to happen here? Julie, Pete, we're just about out of time. Realistically, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think that we're talking to all the senators on the insurance and the labor committee, and there's been some good points. Mr. Seitz, Senator Seitz has made some good points. Eric Kearney has made a lot of good points. Tom Sawyer from Akron. So we're going to continue talking through them. But if the upper echelons of the Republican leadership don't want to hear from us, if they want to remove us from the collective bargaining table, they want to take our voice away, it's going to hurt the public. It's going to hurt the services. It's going to hurt the kids. It's going to hurt the retirees. It's going to affect the whole state.
Julie, last comment?
I think that we're going to be working through the senators, trying to make sure that they understand our point of view. Many of the senators are new. They don't really have a good understanding of education. They may not have a good understanding of collective bargaining. I do know that the state teachers, through their pension plan, there are changes there. The proposal that has gone from STRS to legislation does put us within the 30-year solvency. So that will be something that we're also working on.
Thank you very much. This is complicated stuff. Covered it real quick. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll have you back as this develops. Stay tuned after the break. What are the medical and societal implications of the elimination of school nurses in the new Cincinnati city budget? Welcome back. As part of the budget process in December, Cincinnati City Council decided to cut funding for the city's health department by 25%. One of the implications of that decision is that at the end of the current school year, 35 of the 50 nurses now employed by the city but working in the Cincinnati Public Schools will be laid off. Last Wednesday, people who support the school nurse program rallied at City Hall and testified before council. To discuss the potential implications of this budget cut, I am joined by Dr. Marilyn Crumpton, the medical director of the Division of School and Adolescent Health at the Cincinnati Health Department. Dr. Crumpton also serves as the director of Growing Well Cincinnati and is the immediate past president of the Ohio-based School Healthcare Association. And Dr. Larry Hill, a dentist who serves as the president of the Ohio School-Based Healthcare Association and the executive director of Cincy Smiles Foundation. And Dr. Mona Mansour, a physician at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. All of you, welcome to Newsmakers. Let's begin by asking the sort of basic question. You know, why are school nurses important? I mean, what have they become at this point in time in the school? And Mona, why don't we begin with you?
Oh.
All right, I'm sorry, Marilyn. I looked at you.
Okay.
Okay.
That's great. Sure. Well, one of the things to realize is there's been a lot written about this, and Dr. Julia Graham-Lear from Georgetown University wrote an article about 3 years ago, and she entitled it "A Hidden Healthcare System Emerges." And really, it is literally about the fact that there are many children in this country who are having difficulty accessing healthcare services. And so the school nurse has really developed into the way they access healthcare. So that's one of the things, is a national recognition of the part that school nurses play.
And if we're going to talk about that, is that a way that's sort of a relatively low cost access point for children and their families, in effect?
And it's, yes, and more than that, it's access. And, you know, it's a good value, but a good value compared to, say, the emergency department.
Right, right. And then we talk about that all the time in healthcare. Yes. And Larry, you're a dentist.
Right.
Okay, the nurses aren't doing dental work. Does this have any implications in your immediate professional field, or do you just care about this in a general way?
No, actually it has a great deal of impact on what we do every day. The nurses, about 3 or 4 years ago, started, as a part of their annual vision and hearing screening, started doing oral health assessments as well. And last year they screened 11,000 kids, found about 2,200 of them needed care. And they were actually responsible for doing the case management to assure that 91% of all the kids that needed dental treatment got all their dental treatment completed before the school year was over.
What does that mean, the case management? What did those nurses have to do in order to make sure that happened?
Well, the nurses are basically the quarterbacks, the healthcare quarterback in the school. They're sitting there calling the plays every day. They're seeing the kids who are ill, they're identifying the problems, and they're either taking care of those kids themselves or making sure that the kids are referred to the places that they need to be taken care of. But most importantly, I think they're keeping the kids in school healthy and able to learn. Because there's a lot of parents that, you know, that are working. A lot of the parents of these kids can't get away from, if they leave work during the day to take their child to the doctor, they may go back and find out they don't have a job.
Right. Mona, from sort of a large community-wide point of view, which is what Children's Hospital really takes, how would you evaluate the impact of these nurses?
Well, I think the nurses are really amazing community integrators, and you were talking about sort of cost effectiveness. Having those men and women in the schools to be able to really leverage a huge number of resources, I don't think the general community realizes how much they do in a given day, whether it's sort of doing this case coordination for dental care, whether they are actually, a lot of folks at the rally earlier in the week spoke to the point that children can't access the healthcare system on their own, and in the school they can through that school nurse, and then the school nurse leverages a huge amount of resources, on behalf of the community. Marilyn could probably speak better to the details of it, but for example, the vision screening program, they've leveraged a huge amount of corporate and community partnerships to get kids vision screened, but the nurse is critical to the ultimate, final product of getting that kid glasses.
Moving on to the funding issue, the budgets issue, one of the odd things here in the Cincinnati Public Schools is that a significant chunk of the budget for school nurses comes from the city of Cincinnati, not from the Cincinnati Public School budget. And the city, I think, is basically saying it's not that we're against school nurses, it's just we got to cut someplace, and this is the school's responsibility, not our responsibility. And you were down at City Hall. What do you say to that?
Well, the important thing to realize is these are public health nurses, and they're delivering health services. They're not delivering education services. Mm-hmm. They are helping kids to stay in the classroom and learn, but they really are accessing health. So it's not education we're talking about, it's healthcare.
But
it's just a smart place to locate your community resource, is the place where the children are. So if you think
but what about the budget side of this? Why should the city do it rather than the school? Why shouldn't the pressure be on the school board to say this is a valuable service? You folks should have to step up here.
It's a health issue. I think that's the bottom line. It's a health issue. Educational institutions, the Board of Education is responsible for teaching the kids. We're taking the responsibility of making sure that they're healthy, and I think one of the things that is important to realize is this is a state model. Every city in Ohio is looking at Cincinnati right now to see how we're doing things, because we've been so successful and we're doing things so well.
You're saying around the state, people are looking at Cincinnati on this nursing question, public health question, because before the budget. Is that what you're telling me? That
right. What I'm saying is the model is considered to be such a good model that we've become the model for the state, and we've received national recognition as well. So we're one of the cities in the country that's being looked at right now at because of how well we're doing things.
If the outcomes we're delivering in terms of kids immunized, kids getting dental screenings, kids with asthma visiting the emergency department less because of the presence of the nurse in the building.
All of that can be tracked statistically. You can keep the data on it.
Oh yeah.
We have great information on the exact issues that children have. We know that there are at least 3,600 children diagnosed with asthma in Cincinnati public schools. Mm-hmm. We know that there are 56 insulin-dependent diabetics in Cincinnati public schools. So our role as school health is really to impact the health and the future of those children. Dealing with chronic diseases at this age really has a lot to do with the future of those children.
Okay, but what are you asking the city to do? Are you asking them to put, in effect, to your budget, since you're playing out the rest of this year, is putting $3 million back in the budget? Where are you saying that they should take that? Should they take it by laying off police, laying off fire, some other place? Or what are you practically saying that they should do?
Well, I'm the one here that doesn't have, certainly Marilyn has the city as a master. I don't.
I know.
So I can say that, I wouldn't go out and say take it from here and take it from there. What I'd say is that the city had a real budgetary problem this year, and we all know that, we all recognize it, and nobody sells that short. But when they looked at police, and they looked at, for example, maybe merging with the sheriff's office, what they said was, let's look at that, let's take a look and see what the options are. But in the meantime, they didn't eliminate the police department, but they did eliminate basically they eliminated school health for the kids. What we're saying is put that money back. And we're willing to sit down and talk about whether there are other alternatives. But in the meantime, you can't shut the program down and desert the kids. And that's basically
And that'll
what we've
happen
done.
as of the end of this academic year.
Yes.
Am I
Right.
correct on that?
Right.
One final question, I'm about out of time. Any chance that there's private money out there that could help with this?
There already is, actually. I mean, just even those partnerships that are out there, for example, with Luxottica and the the vision screening. I think again, it's an unspoken. There's a lot of already unkind corporate connections. So I think there's definitely opportunities to leverage more.
Okay.
And the other part we haven't even talked about is the school-based health centers and the funding that's there. And the Health Foundation's really stepped up with a lot of dollars for that.
And we haven't talked about it because I'm out of time. But thank you for being here,
Thank you.
raised
Thank
this
you.
issue up, and thank you for your work.
Thanks.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, we'll mark the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps and the involvement of Cincinnatians. Have a good week.